This is the vlog for November 11th, 2018. Uh, this is 11/11, which is not an especially noteworthy day, except that 7 years ago today, Skyrim came out on the PC and the Xbox 360, and the PS3 version either came out that day or within a month or two. Now, Skyrim is a game I have played a great deal of, but I'm not going to bore you with the details of that. I will say, however, that today was exceedingly cold. Well, it wasn't that cold overall, but it was very cold to walk around in, which is what I did from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock this afternoon, or closer to 2:30 to 4. And just, if you needed any proof that we were in fall and that winter was on its way, I would say look no further than the weather. Now, this upcoming week is supposed to warm up considerably, being the 50s throughout the week. In fact, one day, I believe, had a forecast of a high of 58, which is balmy for this time of year. But yeah, I was quite cold by the time I finally came home. And I wonder just how much more walking. I mean, I have all the time in the world right now, and it's very good for the writing process to be able to walk around and just not have anything else distract you, just have ideas occur to you. Although I find myself having more ideas for this book I've decided not to write until I finish the one that I've already started, which isn't terribly helpful, but I am still making progress, and I've got a good feeling. I think it's going to work. I think it's actually going to be, it's probably going to be a little bit more basic, but it's probably also going to give the reader what they sort of want more than maybe the first part of my original manuscript does. So it'll be shorter, but a quicker payoff. And I think that will benefit. And it allows me to do, as I've said before, a lot more world building with the old world where this story takes place. Terrasia. I didn't even have a name for the continent when I sat down to write the first few chapters of the manuscript back in 2014. I have so much trouble with names. Names are often the last thing that I come up with. Characters that I have are just concepts. For example, I had one whose name was just Strong Bosun for a very long time, because that was what she was. It defined her character. She was a tough as nails gal who ran the day-to-day running of the ship. Nervous Scholar was a character that ended up becoming Daniel Travers, who is the character of Anna's best friend and companion through much of these stories. His character is sort of intended to be sort of a background character, not generally somebody that moves the action forward, but reacts to it. However, he will, if I ever keep writing these books, get his chance to shine down the line. But I'm going to switch gears for a second here and talk about Overlord, the anime that I've been watching. Because as I suspected as early as the first season, they're setting up for what I can only describe as tragedy. I remember hearing someone say that the Greek tragedies were wonderful as they were terrible, because the audience could see what was going to happen, and much as the characters in the stories themselves were powerless to stop the events leading up to the ruin of the characters. For example, in Oedipus Rex, the audience knows who Oedipus is and can, gather who the king he slays on his journey is, even though Oedipus himself is completely unaware that he has murdered his own father, and is also completely unaware that the woman he takes as his wife is his mother. The great and wonderful and terrible thing about tragedies is that it allows for a greater connection of empathy. If you are witnessing characters having a terrible time and you feel terrible, it makes you feel connected to them and more human in some way. There's a style or a trope, if you want to call it that, called developing doomed characters, which is something that usually happens in horror movies but can happen in all forms, in all genres. The idea in a horror movie is that you develop the character to the point where when the monster eats them, you feel bad instead of just... It's the problem of the red shirts in Star Trek. You never feel anything for the red shirt characters because they show up, they're wearing a red shirt, you don't even learn the names, and then the monster eats them. In a horror movie, for example, Aliens, one of my favorites of all time, they use a lot of stereotypes for the colonial Marines so that you get an understanding of who these characters are and what they represent very quickly. And you see this camaraderie they have with each other, that you see that they're friends and that they care for one another even if they're a little rough around the edges, which makes it all the more difficult to watch them slowly get ground up in this war of attrition with these xenomorph creatures. And Overlord is doing just that. Overlord loves to develop characters that you see and recognize the stereotypes of, and then take them away. But the weird thing about Overlord, and why it's different from a lot of other shows like this, is that more often than not, it is not an evil, malignant monster that is dooming all of these characters, but it's the main character, the protagonist, Ainz Al Gaun. But at the very least, it's interesting. I'm going to be finishing up with it with the third season. I assume it's going to last at least another season or two if the light novels and manga are any indication. But this season has finished already. It finished back in October, and I'm getting caught up almost completely. And then I think I'm going to watch a little bit of Gridman, which is usually a really nice pick-me-up. Although Trigger's pretty good at throwing curveballs. Just when you think you've got the show figured out, they'll do something that flips the whole thing on its head, which I prefer, actually. I prefer surprise and sensation over tragedy and the inevitability of these characters' demises. Anyway, I'm Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.